Welcome to another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. Very special episode. Got two guests, and you know them both. Dr. Steve Wood, my colleague, but we also have Larry Hall, trial attorney, St. Louis, Missouri, who, by the way, was on episode number 53, which is about 4 years ago, and over 200 episodes. Larry, I think we have to get you on a little bit more often than every 200 episodes. Do you agree?
Absolutely, Bill. I'm up for it anytime. Always a good conversation with you and Steve.
Yeah, and Steve and I have been tremendously busy. I know you have, and I'm very excited about this because, as you all well know, the plaintiff's bar is highly coordinated, highly sophisticated, and I've mentioned it several times. They have several podcasts out there, and I think that they're actually well done. And one of the things that they do in their podcast, which I'd like to do more of, is they break down a lot of cases, kind of do the post-mortem. And that's what we're going to do here today, Larry, with one of your cases. Now, before we jump in, I just want to, so anybody watching on the YouTube network, you see how beautiful these two bald heads are. Larry's is better than mine. I mean, this is like, you got Curly Neal going on here from the Harlem Globetrotters. I'm not that good. You got some really good lighting too, but I'm very jealous. I don't know, maybe one day Dr. Wood can join the club. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure he has the head. Like, you gotta have a good round head.
Yeah, I might not be able to pull it off.
I'm not sure you could pull it off, Steve.
Yeah.
You do. Everyone who has to wake up and do their head every day, that's just a man that's not confident in the shape of his head. Those of us that are bald, we live without fear. We know exactly what it looks like, and we're ready to show it off.
Like, when we walk into a room, everybody knows we're serious.
Right, absolutely.
This is really, so Steve, I'm not trying to like ostracize you here. I'm just.
Yeah. Maybe I'll try it with a skull cap, fake one for the next podcast, just to see how it feels, and then maybe I'll move forward from there.
Hey, it'll always grow. If you ever want to try to join the club, it'll always grow back.
Yeah.
That's right.
You may want to keep it. Who knows? All right. That being said, so I want to take a deep dive into this case. And Larry, Steve helped you in various aspects of this case. But let's do this. Why don't we can you give the audience kind of a 30,000-foot kind of overview of this case and some of the challenges that you guys faced?
Yeah, so this was a relatively straightforward accident. The plaintiff is either sitting stopped in traffic or going very slowly, and my commercial driver runs into him at a high rate of speed. It was unknown exactly what that rate of speed was. The testimony at trial was it was likely between 55 and 60 miles an hour. My driver did not have a memory of the events surrounding the accident. He was unbuckled and struck his head on the windshield, but indicated that in the 2 seconds before the accident, which is what he could remember, he remembers attempting to brake and steer to his left to try and avoid the accident, but was unsuccessful. So right out of the gate, we have a clear liability case, and it was a case with significant damages. The plaintiff's treatment kind of started mundane, physical therapy, chiropractor, but then eventually proceeded to have a surgery that was unsuccessful. And so by the time that we reached trial, we were facing not only a claim for approximately $600,000 or $700,000 in specials, but also that we had taken away the occupation that this gentleman loved, which was driving a truck. And so by the time trial rolled around, we had a back surgery case, significant physician restrictions, and the inability to do the job or live the life that he once lived. So it certainly was a challenging case from the outset.
So when it comes, now we know that so many of these types of cases resolve, they settle before trial. Can you, again, don't mention any names, no proper names here, we just keep it general.
Yeah.
Can you kind of describe, did you guys mediate the case? Were there any kind of negotiations, and how that process worked, and maybe where some of the hangups were?
Yeah, there was a mediation. It was short. It did not go well. Throughout the entirety of the case, the plaintiff never made a demand below our $3 million policy. So at various stages, there were different amounts offered. Ultimately, there was an offer of judgment of $1 million that was made. 6 to 8 months before trial, there was eventually a $2 million offer that was made, and that was declared our best and final. And to my client's credit, they stuck by that. And that was the last dollar we offered on the case. It was rejected. The $3 million demand was withdrawn. The demand became $5 million, and off we went to trial.
Now, again, without mentioning any names, can you describe? I had a whole podcast on like the different types of plaintiff attorneys, right? What type of plaintiff's firm, and then specifically plaintiff's counsel, were you going up against here?
Yeah, so plaintiff's counsel is skilled. They know the jury pool. They know the venue. They did candidly what I would expect of any high-level attorney in handling this case. They retained the right experts. And what was interesting, we got thrown a little bit of a curveball. They brought in someone who's very involved in the American Trucking ATAA, a plaintiff's organization that's relatively high up in that. A gentleman named Tim Whiting came in at the end to kind of help lead the trial efforts. He closed the case for him and did the jury selection. So not only did we deal with a pretty sophisticated counsel throughout, but then at the end also had a very talented trial attorney come down from Chicago to Southern Illinois. This was tried in Benton, Illinois, in federal court. And so it was high-level attorney work.
Let's talk about that. I see this happening more and more. Do you see this happening more and more where, and it happens on both sides, where you have, the parachuting attorney comes in more towards the end. The plaintiffs do this too. I mean, the defense often does this, particularly maybe when a excess level kicks in and they bring in somebody else. Have you been seeing that more and more? And kind of, as a defense attorney, how do you adjust to that when that kind of falls in your lap?
Sure. So you do see it more and more. I see more and more plaintiffs' lawyers teaming up, which is smart. Candidly, it's a good idea. I think that each of us has strengths and weaknesses, and I think that when you find another attorney that matches you well, it's always a good idea to team up. The benefit that I have over some of my competitors is I've never been the smartest person in any room I've ever been in, and I think that's to my benefit. I try to learn from everybody. So it wasn't, in this case, we had our strategy mapped out relatively early on. But what it did do is it revised some of the ways that I planned to handle opening and closing. The original counsel that was retained, I thought I had a pretty good feel for how she was going to argue it. He introduced a little bit more of a wild card because I was not familiar with him over the course of this case. I wasn't exactly sure the angle he was going to take with it. So I had to have more flexibility when it came to, where the anchor was going to occur, when it was going to be said, how I intended to respond to it. I had to be prepared to be agile at trial.
Now, sticking on this subject, I've seen this work. A lot, and I've seen the defense try to exploit it. Tell me, was there any, because I think, kind of the instinctual response to this is, okay, well, if the jury finds out they brought in some big shot from Chicago that's not a local guy, maybe that'll work against them. Did you try to play that card at all? Or did they front that by saying, hey, I'm from Chicago, but this is an important case, and actually that's why I'm here. This case is so important. How did that play out in the courtroom?
It really didn't, honestly. The plaintiff's attorney referred to him as their partner for this case. And so, I really had no issue with that. We were trying the case in Benton, Illinois. It was a lot of St. Louis lawyers. So I think to call any of us locals might have been kind of overstating it. And so, Bill, I have the firm belief that you got to be the most credible person in the courtroom. And I felt like calling out a Chicago lawyer when we were St. Louis lawyers, it wasn't going to play well. My client was a local guy. And so I wasn't concerned about the lawyers. I really felt like the witness credibility we had the upper hand in, and that's really where I spent my time focusing.
Got it. Now, so you guys did some mock jury research, which I want to hear about. So before you retained us and specifically Steve to help you with this case, what were the types of answers that you wanted to get from the mock jury level? Because you had some obvious challenges here in this case.
Yeah, we wanted to see whether our witness evaluations were accurate. We thought that we had a very likable plaintiff. We were pretty confident in that, but we're just kind of sticking our fingers up in the wind and seeing what we think when we do that. We've done a lot of it. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on when we're likable and when we're not. But we wanted to get a sense of what the jury thought of the various witnesses. We thought that with the money that they were going to ask for, that there was going to be some problems on the other side getting to that level. There was also just a lot of, this gentleman had a prior surgery and had prior back pain complaints. Mm-hmm. And so we also kind of wanted to understand how is a jury going to deal with that. And again, this wasn't an immediate surgery. He went and got some conservative care, and eventually once the conservative care went on for some time, then it was decided to do a surgery. And we thought that we had a really credible argument that this was not any acute injury, but a natural degradation of the spine as time went on. And a gentleman who had worked hard labor and driven trucks and, had some health challenges, was not a healthy individual, heavy smoker, obese, a lot of things that we see in our cases. And so we thought we had a really credible argument that it was unclear if there was really a causal link between the significant portion of his injuries and this accident. And even if they were able to overcome that hurdle, we didn't feel like it was a case where there was going to be a multiplying factor to those damages.
Yeah. Steve, talk a little bit about the research design and kind of how you set up the project and why you set it up the way you did.
Yeah, so what we did was we did opening statements, just the regular general opening statements. And then what we did was went into witness testimony, had them view the witnesses, and then it gives us an opportunity to rate the witnesses. It gives the witnesses or the jurors an opportunity to hear from the witnesses, get open-ended responses so that we get better feedback and thoughts about the witnesses, and then did the closing statements, kind of more of a trial-like format than it was more of, as I know, Bill, you love, and Larry, I know you don't love the close-opening type formats.
It's like running the wishbone offense in 2025. Steve, we run the spread offense here at CSI. Steve, can you talk about the differences in measurement, both sensitivity and accuracy, by setting things up the way you did versus kind of the more, again, historical and traditional clopening, where they're putting everything on it at once and then taking measurement afterwards, whereas we divide things up in sections.
Yeah, and one of the biggest reasons why you do it is because when we do opening statements for the plaintiff, then we can take a measurement about where jurors stand as far as who they're siding for, how strongly they feel. Then you get a chance to do it again after the defense opening. Then you get a chance to do it again after each witness. So rather than let's throw it all in for a 90-minute presentation and see how the jurors feel, we had multiple iterations of being able to measure it. And you can see where jurors will essentially move. Larry, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about jury selection and what we identified from that. But more often than not, you see when you're taking it multiple times, you'll see a juror who might be siding with the plaintiff at one point, shift and then go back to the defense. Then they shift and they go back to the plaintiff. They shift and they go back to the defense. And they're constantly flip-flopping throughout. And it just gives you a better idea of how these jurors are kind of on the fence throughout. Now, we did have some people who were strongly on the side of the defense right from the get-go, strongly on the side of the plaintiff right from the get-go. And I think that was helpful, I'm assuming, for Larry, which we had conversations afterwards about identifying those jurors who were on both sides right from the jump, and how we could approach it from jury selection standpoint. But we wouldn't have known that, how entrenched they were, if we hadn't done the measurements over and over and over again. Right.
Yeah, and that's really, really the key, and why the clopening doesn't give you that. It's really not a sophisticated way to do research. It's actually very basic, and it can be very misleading because you don't have those measurements throughout. So it's hard to weigh various variables. So I want to talk about jury selection in a second. Larry, what were some of the main things that you learned from doing the mock jury research, and were there any surprises that you said, "Oh wow, didn't see that coming"?
Yeah, there were both. What we learned is that out of our panel of, I think 23, if I remember correctly, it was somewhere in the low 20s. We had 3 different juries. That most of them were very reasonable in their damage awards. We had one kind of runaway jury, and that was driven by 2 individuals. And so what we learned was that the danger in this case is a very strong and passionate plaintiff juror who could essentially overtake the will of the group and lead to a big number. And what we were able to do, and we can kind of dive into this when we talk about the jury selection part, is post-mortem, we looked at the characteristics that these individuals had. And obviously that was at the top of our list for what we were looking for when we picked the jury.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to go back and mention. I'm sure most people know, but what I didn't get to is that we did have 3 groups that we separated out and allowed them to deliberate, and then Larry and myself and the others got a chance to watch it, which allowed us to see the point that Larry was bringing up about how that one kind of runaway jury was driven by 2 individuals, which allowed us to help develop this kind of personality profile that we want to look for in jury selection.
Yeah, and Steve, talk more about that because I think that's really key. And when we had Tony Batista on, we talked about our big case in New York City, which that was a monster, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And how that jury profile is so critical. But you have to collect data and analyze this a certain way to find these characteristics, right?
Yeah, and it's always like talking about, well, I mean, I guess, Larry, how do you feel when you get a chance to see the jurors deliberate? I always talk about it being kind of like how the sausage gets made. I mean, I know it can be empowering, but it also can be terrifying, can it?
Yeah, it sure can, especially when you felt really good about your evaluation going into it. And I don't know if you recall this or not, Steve, but I was tasked with listening, which it was a blessing, honestly. I was tasked with listening to the runaway jury. So I listened to every minute. And so I see, my associate and you with the other juries kind of giving thumbs up and we're looking pretty good. And then I'm just giving the thumbs down. This is off the rails. And I'm like, man, this is going to be a heck of a report to write about it. But what started to become clear is during those deliberations, we got the chance to look at how those jurors had moved throughout the case. And what we realized was that there were a number of jurors on that panel who looked like really favorable defense jurors, and they probably were, but they weren't followers, or they weren't leaders. They were going to be followers. And even though they felt passionate, we knew that they were going to succumb to leaders who didn't agree with them. And so when we looked in the other rooms, it was much more of a discussion versus being driven by individuals. And so immediately we had some characteristics to look for, in addition to some very specific things that if we were going to have a leader on the jury, that was going to be a potential worrisome point for us, and someone that we need to be really comfortable with coming in.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that, and then I'll kick it back over to you, Larry, on that as far as that goes. I think it often gets overlooked as far as jury selection of who do we want, who's a good juror, who's a bad juror. But to your point, when you were saying is you could get a bunch of good jurors that are on your side that are weak, that aren't going to be leaders. So it's not necessarily a matter of can we stack the deck in the box with all the people that are going to be good for us. It's can we also make sure we identify who the leader is that's going to basically overpower the other jurors.
Yeah, we had some great jurors in that room based on their survey responses, and they folded tent and stopped talking as soon as these particular individuals called them out in an aggressive way. They were not willing to push back, and they just folded tent, and that was it.
Yeah, I have a question for both of you because Steve, I know you've been in this position before. I've been consulting on jury selections, and I have purposely told counsel to leave a juror on and not strike them. And everything on paper screamed plaintiff. Mm-hmm. But the person was so soft-spoken not really mature, not a big talker. And I'm like, we're not wasting a strike on some, like, I don't care because they're a follower. They're going to get frustrated and go with the crowd. I'm looking for people that have very strong communication skills and people that are very emotional. Steve, can you talk about the importance of that specific factor? Because I think, like, we see defense counsel get caught up so often on just looking at demographic variables, right? And you're looking at like these kind of classic signs, which none of them are predictive, by the way. We know that. And if you're not really looking at someone's, their communication skills, how not necessarily emotional in a sad or happy way, but when they communicate, are they a passionate communicator, right? How do they come across? Do they have a presence in the room? Because that person, regardless of their demographics, that person is going to be the conductor of this train, right, Steve? And how
Yeah.
you really need to be looking for that in jury selection.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that often gets overlooked is that you, like you say, you get too locked in and focused on getting rid of a juror because they might be quote unquote bad for you, rather than taking into consideration about whether or not anybody, I would call them mousy, right? Whether they're going to be in there and anybody's actually going to listen to them. Yeah, they might have opinions or something, but they're just going to get rolled over by everybody else in the room. So you have to be strategic and get rid of those other people who are more of the outspoken ones. And I think one of the other things when we're talking about jury selection about outspoken ones, how many times, Larry, have you had it before where you might have a juror, and maybe it happened in this case, where you have a juror that says like one good thing for your case, and everybody's like, "Oh, they're going to be good. Didn't you hear what they said about that?" But
Yeah.
then they've said like seven other things that have been really bad for your case, and you have to take those in holistically, and rather than focus on the one, you have to look at it on the larger scale.
We even had I have a great example from this case that happened. I tried a case back in November of 23, and we got a good result. It was about a $3 million result. We were hoping for a better result. It came in right about where the case could have settled before the suit. But in that case, there was a union president that came in and testified, and I think kind of won the case for the plaintiff. And basically, when I deposed him, he was in a $500 suit. He had an office job. On the day when he testified at trial, he showed up from a job site with his eyes covered in dust, and I think it worked. And so in this case, we actually had a juror on the panel who said some things that in isolation were favorable for the defense, but she also was from a very proud union household, and her husband was a union rep. And so I said, look, and she was a strong personality. And I said, if we're going to lose this case, we're not going to lose it with. I said, my gut tells me that she's a huge risk because she's a very strong personality. She's a leader, and she's going to go home at night. And it's possible in a strong union household that there's an explanation to her that there's that potentially there's something that you need to stick up for workers and unions have their purpose, but in lawsuits, they can be dangerous because they often facilitate presentations from plaintiffs' bars and things like that to help those folks when they get injured. And so even though she said some things in isolation, I mean, my associate was like, I don't understand. Why are you saying that that's one of our hard strikes? And I said, because she's someone that could drive the jury to the number. I said, when I look at this panel, she's someone that could drive the jury to the number, and it's just not a risk we're going to take when we looked at the panel as a whole.
Yeah. So can you guys describe how you worked together prior to jury selection to set up a strategy? And then Larry, if you can then expand on that and just kind of tell us what the voir dire was like, what the judges' parameters were, things like that.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, after when we did the mock trial and got that information and stuff, Larry and I talked a little bit more about on strategy, how we were going to approach it, what we learned from the mock trial as far as who we thought we did or didn't want, kind of the voir dire questions that we wanted to do. So we had that kind of informal conversation, and then he kind of took it from there. But a lot of it was informed by the mock trial research and what we learned in the mock trial research. That was kind of the lead up to jury selection. So at least even though I wasn't there physically and didn't do that, Larry had the ammunition that he needed to be able to go into jury selection at least.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Bill, that kind of our postmortem with Steve, he wasn't at trial, but I mean, we had a plan. I mean, we knew that day before we walked out of the hotel conference room what our plan was going to be, but we refined that prior to trial, and I walked in, confident as hell in exactly what my mission was when we were going to pick a jury.
I think I want to talk about this because I'm going to say something very controversial here. This is not going to go over well, but we've been down this road before here on the Litigation Psychology podcast. Steve and I and our team are beyond busy. Like, the capacity's crazy, right? It's just the volume's nuts. And we get all these calls, like, come pick this jury, come pick this jury. Like, it's impossible. You can't do it. It's all for time. It's impossible. And so what we have, our view on this is that I'm not saying having a jury consultant at trial is a bad thing. What I'm saying is, I think the bigger thing is having the plan. I think when you have the right plan, you have the right jury selection strategy, you have the right voir dire structure, you're hitting that. If you have that plan and you're a trial attorney, you're in really, really, really good shape. I mean, again, because remember, you're not going to be able to hire a jury consultant for every single trial you have. You got to be able to do this stuff yourself. But I think even more value is than having, say, Steve there right next to you, is you and Steve spending several hours poring over these results, making a plan together to send you into trial fully armed. Because, yeah, again, and Larry, we get calls, and Steve's going to laugh when I say this, we get calls of people going, can you show up and help pick this jury? Right. And I'm like, and here's our new policy starting this year. I go, no. And they go, well, you're a jury consultant. That's your job. Just show up and help pick the jury. I go, no. And they go, why not? I go, does a surgeon go into surgery with a scalpel, like, without imaging?
Right.
Right, we're just going to start cutting. No. We need data to develop the plan. Like, I'm not like, I don't go in there with a crystal ball, right, Steve? I mean, yeah. That's impossible. So I'm glad that you guys worked out the plan. And what was your, describe your level of confidence in the plan, even though Steve wasn't there?
Oh, my level of confidence was 100%. I mean, we knew that we had, and I affectionately say, my associates will tell you, I got the receipts. I mean, that's what I say. I got the receipts. Yeah. I know we did the work. The client, we were lucky enough to have a client that supported putting the work going in, and I'll expand a little bit on the jury selection process because it shows why the plan was so important. So we were set to go to trial on a Monday, and the Thursday. So not the week before trial, but 10 days before trial, we get a notice, hey, your trial's been kicked to start Tuesday. Well, in normal people's lives, 24-hour delay isn't a huge deal. When you've scheduled experts and all kinds of stuff, it causes all kinds of heck to break loose. And so plaintiff's lawyer and us contacted the court and said, hey, we realize it's only 24 hours, but we're going to either need to start on Monday or we're going to need a continuance. And so the court called us back on Friday afternoon and said, the judge has a way that we can still have the trial. We're going to bring the panel in Wednesday morning before trial. And the reason that we couldn't start trial on Monday was they had a large class action. So they had a huge panel going in. Yeah. They were at capacity. And so by going in early, we were able to pick our jury, and then we were able to start at 10 a.m. on Monday. But the point of that story was, are you guys ready to go Wednesday? Sure. Yeah. What do you want us to show up? We'll go pick a jury this afternoon, because we knew the plan, it was already done. And then it even became more important because in talking to the court had some initial questioning that they did. And then the attorneys were going to get 15 minutes with the panel, 24-person panel. The attorneys were going to get 15 minutes. Wow. And so, I also practice in Missouri State Court, where usually plaintiff takes 3.5 or 4 hours. And then I usually am short and take an hour and a half. So this is kind of the shotgun approach. And so the benefit of having the research is the way that the judge did it. I've never seen this done before. They had a handheld mic and they passed it around to the whole panel. Where are you from? Are you married? Do you have kids? What's your job? What do you like to do in your free time? Wow. And I will tell you that listening to that, based on the research we had done, we had 2 or 3 people that we were uncertain about. And other than that, we had a really clear plan going in on candidly how we were going to try. And by the time I got up there was a couple people I was going to try and rehabilitate. but other than that, what we did is we just covered the key characteristics that we knew we didn't want on our jury, which was identified as people with chronic pain that were seeing pain clinic, and or people who had undergone a back surgery and were suffering complications from it. Because we knew from the mock that some of those people have frustrations with insurance companies and with trying to get care, and they're very sympathetic to someone says that they were in pain, and they weren't really concerned about causation. And we knew we needed jurors that were concerned about causation. So the judge went around. It took about an hour and a half to get through all 24 to get up and say their piece. And then plaintiff stood up and started with, hey, what if I told you that we were going to ask for hundreds of millions of dollars?
There you go. There you go.
And I objected, and it was sustained. And then he asked some questions about, well, we're going to ask for some large sum of money, tens of millions of dollars. And so there's conditioning going on right away. This judge in particular did not like that, though, and did not like the conditioning. And this was a rural jury, and the jurors were trying to figure out what was going on. He's talking about these big amounts of money. I'm having objections sustained during voir dire, which is, I don't like to object to voir dire. I save them for when I think I'm really going to win, because especially with only 15 minutes, you don't want to be seen as trying to hide something from these folks that are in there. But didn't really. He identified some pro-defendant jurors and was able to get enough to get them struck. But by the time I was going up there, I knew kind of who was lost causes for us. I knew who was lost causes for plaintiff, and I had a very direct plan on what I wanted to do, and I executed it. So I went up and talked about the characteristics that we knew. Funny thing, the characteristics that we were worried about, two of the panel members raised their hand and indicated that they had those issues, and I had already had them struck on my list. I mean, from when they were talking initially, we knew that they were not going to be good jurors from us. So it kind of confirmed what we already knew. So then from there, after 15 minutes for each, we moved into the jury selection phase. The way that this judge does it is each side had to tender 3 jurors. Backstriking was allowed within the panel. So the way it worked was we did all the challenges for cause, and then plaintiff had to go first. So plaintiff had to tender the first panel, and so they used peremptories. They used peremptories on one of the folks in the first panel, and so then it got to us, so once you had 3 seated, they were seated, and you couldn't backstrike. So then it was our turn to tender a panel. We did that by the time that we got to that selection, because of the work we had done with Steve. We knew the exact 3 jurors we wanted to strike. We knew exactly how far, based on the strikes for cause, that we were going to get in the panel. And just candidly, I think we were more prepared for the process than the other side. And usually the defense is not the one that is that. I mean, I think that I like to, like you, Bill, I'm a junkie on plaintiffs podcasts.
Yeah.
And they almost always feel like they have the upper hand in that regard. We picked a jury with 6 women and 1 man. If we were going for a 0 verdict, I would have been a little bit concerned, because I knew that we had a sympathetic jury.
Yeah.
But the good news is we didn't have anyone who I viewed was going to dominate the panel. Instead, I thought that we had a lot of women. The gentleman who was on the jury was a young man, and there were a lot of women professionals that were significantly older than him. We thought he was not going to be a leader. We were right in that regard. And so we had a lot of people who respected each other, and we knew we were going to have a conversation together. Yeah. And we knew from our work with Steve that when that happens, we were going to have a good day.
Well, let's back up for 1 second, Bill. I want to interject. Did you notice Larry said one thing about how old was the male that was on there?
Early 20s.
He was young?
Yeah.
Early 20s, and the verdict came back at what? 1 million?
1 million, yeah.
Oh, I thought all these young jurors were the ones that were to blame for these runaway juries.
Yeah. I disagree with you. They aren't. It's not them. There may be some out there, but based on my reading from you all and others, race, age, throw it out the window. That's not what's driving these verdicts. And we have the information from our work on this case and others that we've done with you guys to support it. And we know what drives these numbers. And it's not, you know, I mean, honestly, it's not, when I hear someone refer to race or age or political party affiliation, oh, that's a bad juror because they are a Republican or a Democrat, or they're young or they're old. Yeah. Honestly, I know they don't know what they're talking about. And I know that they're not looking at the research, because the research is very clear. It's not that easy, and that's a lazy way out, in my opinion.
It's 100% lazy. And so two things I want to talk about here. Imagine picking the jury if you didn't have the data and the plan, right? Which I think happens in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Which I think the defense attorney then defaults to these demographic stigmas, which are not predictive, and you end up making a lot of mistakes that are completely preventable, and just going on hunches and gut feelings and stigmas. And you very well you may have picked a very different jury, but I think, can you just describe, again, I'm trying to harp on this because I think it's so important. Mm-hmm. Like your emotional status and your confidence level when you have the plan. Versus when you don't. Yeah,
absolutely. There is no, especially at trial, there's no replacement for confidence, and confidence comes from hard work and from having a client that believes in doing the things you need to do to get the case properly prepared for trial. And so my blood pressure didn't rise, and we stood up and we walked out of that courtroom, and I told my associate we had a good day. Now we have to go have another good day on Monday, and then we have to have a good day on Tuesday, and then we have to have a good day on Wednesday, and then hopefully we get a good result. But we've put ourselves in a position to get a good result today. And I said that with 100% confidence walking out of the courtroom. And that was because it was information fact. I had the receipts.
Yeah. Now, speaking of receipts, how did you use the data and the results of your mock jury research to plan your opening based on what you had learned in the research? Because I think voir dire and opening are highly connected, but opening is really, that's really where I think that's just so incredibly important, is to have the right story, have the right strategy, and to know how to order your information. How did you develop your opening based on what you saw in the mock jury?
So we knew, so what we did in our opening, Bill, is we focused on the key points that we knew the jury's focused on in our mock. So one advantage we knew we had walking in, we knew the jury was going to like our client. He was a farmer. He was a member of these folks' community. We started to tell the jury some of his story. And then we thought it was really important to leave the jury with some questions that I was going to bring up in closing that pointed out the weaknesses in plaintiff's case and said they need to answer this for you during their case. And if they don't, you need to make sure you listen to the evidence. But in particular during plaintiff's case, because they get to go first, we want you to listen to, was there a change in symptoms at some point that's unexplained? And if there is, why haven't they explained it to you? Because it's their burden. Do the doctors really disagree, or is this being spun in some way? Is this gentleman truly able to work based on doctor restrictions, or just a paid litigation consultant's opinion? And so we knew from what our pro-defense jurors, the questions that they focused on in the mock, we knew the trial themes that we were going to weave throughout closing, that were going to come in during our crosses, and then during our close that we were absolutely going to hammer.
And I think, and again, I've written about this, I've spoken about it. This is one of the top reasons there's nuclear verdicts, is when you don't have this plan and this data. What are you doing? Like, what are you really doing? You're kind of guessing. And I don't think that's very, very wise. And so to go to this extent to get the data, and you can tell how it drove your decision making, how confident you were, I think is excellent. Now, were there any, because I think every trial has them, was there any what I would call like oh shit moments in the trial? Maybe a witness that you're like, what's going on here?
I think that the one, and this really kind of happened in pre-trial, and then it played out at trial, but the judge ruled that we were not going to get to talk about a prior back surgery that this gentleman had. And so their story of the case was that he left his career in labor to drive a truck because that was his dream. Not true. He left his career in labor because he had a back surgery when he wrecked a motorcycle and drove a truck because that's what he could do physically at that point. And so that was a little bit of a curveball for us. And so then as I was preparing to cross-examine the doctors, we had a lengthy conversation with the judge on the record at the conclusion of day one, because he said the lumbar, because they were saying the lumbar surgery is unrelated. We're not claiming damages to the lumbar spine. And so as I was preparing my crosses, and the judge said there shall be no mention of lumbar spine in this trial. This is after day one. The medical records became unusable.
Yeah.
And then we showed up and come to find out plaintiff's counsel had redacted the medical records in a way that was very, very beneficial to them, not in black, but in white, to almost make it seem like the medical records said things that they didn't. And we had a lot of concern that if those got in, that the jury was going to be misled and that we could be in a situation where we were going to be in trouble. And so, on night one, when I was putting together my cross and I was looking at these records for these doctors that we were going to depose, I looked at what I prepared pre-trial and I was modifying that. I said, man, this is going to be an issue. And that was definitely the oh shit moment. But the good news for us is we showed the judge these redacted medical records, and plaintiffs smartly initially said, hey, we're not going to use them. And then they attempted to introduce one that had been redacted, and at that point, based on some other testimony that had taken place, the judge said, look, these jurors are going to get to hear that this gentleman had prior back pain. They aren't going to get to hear the word surgery. But there was a lot of concern when I was looking at these redacted medical records that this story about this guy basically being healthy until our rec was going to get to come in. And if that happened, it would have been problematic, and it wasn't factual.
Yeah. So talk about the ultimate verdict and talk about your feelings about it. Talk about how your client felt about it, kind of, looking back on all the work you did, the strategy you took.
Yeah. So the one thing that one of the reasons why I think the mocks are so important is you test your ankle. This was a case with admitted liability and admitted damages. We had a retained orthopedic expert that said that the conservative care this gentleman received after the accident was appropriate. The time he took off of work was appropriate. He had gotten some injections during that time. And so there was about $120,000 worth of meds that we were on board for. And then there was about 6 months of wages. And, there's some temptation when you've already offered $2 million to offer, to anchor at 500 or 800, because you're like, oh, the jury may like that more. And that would still be a really good result from us, because ultimately at trial, our goal was to keep it below 3. Anything below 3 was going to be a win for us. And so there was some temptation, even during trial, to say, well, maybe we should raise our anchor point. But at the mock, we had anchored at around $377,000. That was supported. And what I ultimately learned at the mock was try the case as it should be tried and anchor as your case warrants based on the case you're trying. Don't second guess yourself and give an anchor that's not consistent with the case that you've tried, because then you've lost credibility. And so while there was some hesitation during the trial to say, oh, maybe we should bump up our anchor point a little bit and seem more reasonable during close, we allowed our research to play its role. We anchored exactly where we wanted to. Plaintiff asked for $9.8 million. We anchored at 377. During deliberations, there was some discussion of a high-low. Our high would have been the policy limit. That was immediately rejected. And so we were getting the jury verdict. When the verdict came back at $1 million, I'll be honest, I love what I do. And I love representing the men and women who drive trucks, and the relief on my client's face when they heard that verdict. He was sitting there with his wife. He's a gentleman in his 70s. And those post verdict hugs,
Yeah.
that's what it's about. That's what, I get to meet people at some of their lowest points in their life. I know plaintiffs do too. And they have a lot of passion for what they do, and they should. So do I, and I'm unapologetic about it.
I think that's great.
And so it's my honor to represent folks like the gentleman I represented. And he's a tough guy. I'm a tough guy, but those hugs, two tough guys hugging, there's nothing better.
That's fantastic. And I don't think, and I hear the plaintiff attorneys saying things like that pretty much constantly. I'm not sure I've ever heard a defense attorney describe it the way you just did. And I think that's terrific.
Well, Bill, I posted on LinkedIn about this. I mean, I think that trucking defense attorneys, sometimes we almost think because people have a negative perception of our clients that we need to be kind of not scared, but we aren't in love with our clients like plaintiffs are in love with our clients. I had 2 really successful trials last month, and in both, I embraced the trucking industry full-throatedly. And I talked about how much I respected my clients, the role that my clients play in our daily life. And I'll tell you, it's resonating and it works. And we shouldn't be afraid. Being afraid is what gets you bad results. If you listen to plaintiffs' podcasts, they'll tell you can basically never ask for enough money if you have passion behind your case. And the same thing applies on the defense side. And I'll say our folks have a compelling story to tell, and I'm here to tell it. And I think there's other folks around the country that are too. And I think my lesson learned is be my authentic self, show the gratitude and love that I genuinely have for the trucking industry, and it works.
Well, it gives you credibility, right? You come across this, like you said, you're passionate, you're credible, authentic, versus looking like you're putting on a show in order to try to get your client off the hook, right? You're actually invested in it in much the same way like the plaintiff side is.
Right, exactly.
All right. This has been a tremendous episode. Final question, then we're going to wrap this up. Describe how the mock jury research is a really effective tool to help develop younger attorneys, associates, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in addition to getting the research about a particular case, mock juries are how I evaluate lawyers that are ready for trial. Because I know in this case, my associate, who's one of my all-star associates, I'm blessed to work with people that are smarter than me. I got to see him on his feet in front of 23 people. So I had full and complete confidence in him when he was standing in front of 7 people that he was going to be just fine. And so in a day and age where it's hard to get trials for young associates to get their feet wetted, and for even partners to try, it's hard to find cases to try. A mock jury with live jurors in a conference room is as close as you're going to get, and provides assurance and allows people to get their sea legs for when they're standing up at trial. If you can do it in front of 23 people with cameras on you, you can sure as heck do it in front of 7. And it's a tool that I just absolutely love. My clients know that if the case it's going to get tried and there's any type of significant exposure, I'm looking to do it because it's so invaluable as a teaching tool, as a learning tool for developing associates and for understanding your case and walking into courtroom with the confidence that you know exactly, you have a plan and you're going to go in there and execute it. And in my view, whichever side has that clear plan and the plan for execution is generally the side that's going to come out on the better end of it.
Completely agree. Steve, any final comments? What a great story.
Yeah, no, it was fun, and I was happy that it turned out the way it did, because like I said, I got to know his clients too through that. So, obviously, Bill, you and I get invested in these cases too, right? We don't just come in and do what we got to do and then get out. We actually have as much, have a lot of interest in how it happens. So that was one of the good things when I got to see the picture that Larry posted with his clients on LinkedIn, and how happy they were. That was a good moment.
It's great to see. I don't think we see. I don't think we see enough of that. Larry, I've got one more question because I lied. I always have one more question. I think this is more bigger issue. I mean, you and I, we have crossed paths for years, particularly at a lot of conferences. What do you think the defense bar can be doing, specifically in transportation litigation? What do you think the defense bar can do better?
I think we need to be more aggressive. We need to take a page out of the plaintiff's playbook. In my office every week, I sit and meet with the associates and we look at each case and we decide what needs to take place over the course of that week. And my associates know that on every case, they're going to get asked from me, how are we going to throw a punch in this case? Because right, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Even if you've admitted liability, how are we going to throw a punch on damages, which is what we did in this case. And when you think about a case like that and you're taking the fight to the other side, you get the upper hand. And what I say is punch and get them off balance, and then don't stop punching until it's over. And what we found, and I'll leave out names, a lot of large national lawyer firms and even local large plaintiffs firms are overworked, understaffed. And so that aggressiveness pays off in resolving cases for lower than they would be otherwise. And like we saw in this trial, we were prepared. We were ready to go. And we were unapologetic about what we were doing. I think so many times as defense attorneys, because someone's hurt on the other side, we have those humans' emotions of sympathy, which of course you feel bad for someone that's hurt. But when I walk into the courtroom, I have an edge, and that edge is that I represent my clients, and I'm proud to be there on their behalf. And I think defense lawyers sometimes shy away from that. And what I would say as a defense bar, what we need to do is stand up a little taller, stick our chests out a little bit further, and be ready to take the fight to the other side. Because 9 times out of 10, we have a compelling as hell story to tell. And if you go into the courtroom and you tell it unapologetically, I think you're going to win more times than you're going to lose.
Outstanding. Well, Steve, Larry, thank you so much for this. I think this episode has been one of our best by far.
We got to have Larry on more often than every.
Not every 200 episodes, Larry. But I think it'd be good to have, guys. Maybe have him back on and maybe do a little bit of a panel with a couple of other attorneys. I think that'd be interesting. Compare some ideas. To our audience, thank you so much for participating. Please go, whether it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, leave a review. We love your review. Again, this is great. Thank you so much, guys. So Litigation Psychology Podcast brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. We will see you next time.